Welcome, everyone, to episode 4 of the 76 Reasons podcast brought to you by the 5 Reasons Sports Network. As always, I'm Anthony Pasciolla, joined by my co host Jacob Moreno. And it's always a great day to be talking about the Sixers because they're
Is
always
it?
losing. They're always losing. It's always so much fun to talk about this basketball team that just loses games. Before we even get into all the losing they've done recently, the biggest news out of Philadelphia is Joel Embiid being out once again, 7 to 10 days. Jacob, just initial thoughts on what's going on with Embiid.
First, I'll kind of give a rundown of the report. So, yesterday, the Sixers PR released a statement. Shams broke it first, per usual. So, pretty much, Embiid will be reevaluated in 7 to 10 days. He just did a simple on-court workout, and the team discovered some increased swelling. But apparently, his foot sprain, which has held him out for the last 6 games, has healed. I find the timing of that to be interesting. It's almost like when one thing heals, another thing shows up. But it's alarming. I mean, the fact that he hasn't played in 6 straight games and has knee swelling after just doing a routine on-court workout is very concerning. And it's just like, at what point do you just consider shutting him down? They're 9 games below 500. Their schedule's not going to get any easier, which we'll get into later. But like, it's just not looking good. I mean, he can't even complete a simple on-court workout that like NBA players do multiple times a
Right.
week. It's very alarming, and I don't know. My optimism for his health for the season just isn't good. And when you factor in that he's getting that 3 year max extension and he's not going to get any younger, it's very frightening for the Sixers' short term future and long term.
Yeah, we're nearing the midway point of the regular season. We're like 2 or 3 games away, if my math is correct there. But I like to hear you're coming to the negative side about potentially shutting him down. And it's unfortunate. He's played 13 games this season. And I get before the season started that the Sixers' plan was, all right, we brought in Paul George, and the idea there is to have George and Maxey kind of carry all of the workload during the regular season, and then just let Embiid go like full strength in the postseason. But how is anyone watching the Sixers and what's going on supposed to trust that now? And that's not even talking about the inconsistency with George and Maxey being able to lead a regular season team, but just from a strict standpoint of being able to trust Embiid's body and health at all at this point. There's not a single sign I see that would give me confidence where he's gonna be okay and good to go come at best a play-in tournament game. That's what scares me the most, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. And like, even if the Sixers team makes the play in off their talent alone, like, do you trust their chemistry in a do or die
Yeah.
game? Again,
Yep.
it doesn't matter if against the Hawks or the Celtics. Like, I don't trust this team to magically come together and flip a switch in the playoffs. That's not who this team is this year, and that's honestly never who they have
Yeah.
been in the last 7 years. So it's
True.
just a very bad situation that they're in. And at a certain point, I think, you have to consider the season maybe a lost cause. Maybe that's an overreaction because they're only, I think, 1.5 games outside of the 10th seed. But with how wrong everything has gone and so many more topics we're going to touch on, it's just hard to, want to invest draft capital into this team.
Yeah, something interesting is the Oklahoma City draft pick. To give context for those of you who don't know, it's top six protected. So Philly needs to end up landing in the top six to get that pick this year. One idea I've seen thrown around, which I thought was very interesting, and we were going to talk about selling at the trade deadline a little later, but we can kind of jump up to that now, is does Oklahoma City, for any reason, remove the protections from that pick in a trade? It's an interesting concept. I don't know what Sam Presti would do in that situation. I feel like you would need, I don't know, man. I mean, a guy like Yabusele, I think, would be a great addition to that Thunder team, but he's also not valuable enough to completely remove protections from a first round pick, in my opinion. What are your kind of thoughts on that whole pick situation? What approach that you should take with that?
It's interesting. A follower talked to me about this a few months ago. He had a very interesting thought because the Sixers, I think, have the 2026 pick swap between the Thunder, Rockets, and I forget the other team, but maybe if you re-offered that and Yabusele, maybe they could like lift the pick restrictions from
Yeah.
like 1 to 14 or something like that. So I think that's an interesting thought because I think at this point the Sixers have unfortunately won enough games to where if they did want to tank, it will be very hard for them to finish at the bottom of the East. So
Yeah.
if you could kind of just raise those protections a little bit just so they can get maybe a late lottery pick just to see what happens, I think that could be something that's definitely interesting. But as far as them selling as a whole, I mean, I wrote a whole 700 word article on it. I think based on what we touched on, the lack of chemistry, the lack of being able to stay healthy for more than a week. I think the season at this point is a lost cause. Even if, like we said, if they do make the play-in,
Yeah.
I don't trust them to come together and magically beat whatever opponent then advance and see roll into the playoffs. That's just not who this team is. The team just doesn't have that winning culture, and be it or not, we've seen it. So I think selling, they have multiple assets who they could sell. I'm not saying whether they should or shouldn't. I'm just going to list some options. Obviously, Gershon Yabusele is the big name here. The Sixers probably won't have enough money to keep him, so maybe selling him is the best choice. And I
Yeah.
think a interesting trade that came to mind with Yabusele is Cam Whitmore from the Rockets because if you've kept up with the Rockets this season, Cam Whitmore is
Mm.
not happy. I watched the other game or the game other night where Cam Whitmore didn't get a pass from Ben Thompson, literally threw a hissy fit, jumped up in the air mid play because he didn't get the ball. Then the next possession afterwards, he takes a contested layup over three defenders. So obviously, he's not happy with his role in Houston. Can't say I blame the Rocks because they just have that many young, talented wings that
Yeah.
like he just really can't get a role. So, and they're also a team who desperately needs 3 point shooting, which Yabu provides as a front court player. So maybe if you throw Yabu, maybe like a pick swap, a few seconds for Cam Whitmore, that could be something they could do to get younger. I think that's definitely an interesting direction. Kelly Oubre is also another person because he has an 8 million player option after this season. I wouldn't necessarily want to move Oubre from the Sixers, but there's an offer that presents itself for like an interesting young prospect. I would definitely explore it. Andre Drummond's someone else. I think I'd be more favorable in moving Drummond than Oubre because
Yeah,
Drummond also
for
has a
sure.
5 million player option this season. So if like you can just kind of move him and let Dembona just get some more experience running back up the entire season, I think that could be valuable if you want to go full selling. So I mean, the blueprint's there if they want to do it. I think they should at this point. So
Look, I said it earlier, I'll say it again. Welcome to the throw in the towel team of the Sixers season. I've been saying it for a couple weeks now, and I know I was a little aggressive on it, but I mean, the season has continued to go just how it's been. It was always at some point they're going to hit their stride, and they're just not. It's that simple. So I agree with you on the decision to sell in early February. In terms of that Yabu trade, that's like that really does work for both sides because if I'm looking at it from Houston's perspective, Houston needs to make a move literally to get rid of youth. Like they have too much just all across the board. Like there's too many guys in there that have the potential to contribute to a competitive team or can, show star level flashes if given a bigger opportunity. I think Cam Whitmore is one of those guys. I remember in that draft, people were shocked he
yep,
fell to 20, I want to say.
17. So,
Yeah,
yeah, somewhere
somewhere
in that
around
range.
there. But I remember specifically when the Heat took Hame over Cam Whitmore. That was the big one that people were really calling out on Twitter, and obviously that's worked out well for the Heat for the most part. Jame's not having a great sophomore season, but Whitmore's definitely an intriguing guy that could have gone a lot higher in that draft, and that's for a reason. So you bring him into Philadelphia. If you're throwing in the towel
Villanova
on this
product too.
season, true. Pair him with good old veteran Kyle Lowry, former Villanova Wildcat. Just an outstanding backup point guard Kyle Lowry is these days, man. What a player. But I don't know. In terms of Oubre and Drummond, they've both just been so like underwhelming, I guess. I mean, Oubre had such a great year in Philly last year, and I expected a little more of the same, and it's not been quite to that standard. Drummond, I mean, Charles Barkley calls this dude the best backup center in the NBA, and he is not meeting that criteria, but that's also Charles
Charles
Barkley,
Barkley
so
says a lot of things.
yep, exactly. Um, so I mean, you're what? 9 games below 500. The best outcome you're going to get in terms of postseason here is a first round loss to Boston, Cleveland, New York. Why would you want that over potentially a lottery pick in the range of if they get those protections off, like we were talking about, 7 to 14? I mean, look like what they did right outside the lottery, I believe, last year with Jared McCain.
Mhm.
Um, and this class is great. So much better than the 2024 class. So Philly wouldn't need to do so much hard work in the scouting department to kind of find talent this year compared to last. I want to transition though. Now we can talk about all the losing because, I mean, it's what's happening. It's the reason we're talking about them selling at the deadline. Just break down what's been going on this 4 game losing streak.
So, first of all, they lost to the New Orleans Pelicans, which is just unacceptable. I mean, overall, throughout these past 4 games, they've been completely injured. I mean, against the Thunder, they rolled out a starting lineup of Gershon Yabusele, Kelly Oubre, Eric Gordon, Ricky Council, and Reggie Jackson. Let's let that sink in for a second. And Kenny Beecham made an amazing tweet. It was like he said that lineup is. I was a fan of this team when they had XXX starting, but except this team has 3 max players on the roster, and that's
Yep.
truly just a great summary of how the season has been so far. It's just been disastrous, and even in the games in this losing streak where or not beat, Paul George and Tyrese Maxey did play, the offense just hasn't changed. And I've preached this since October. I mean, it's January 18th and we're still seeing the same basic offense with Embiid out. And
Yep.
I think it's just kind of disappointing just to see the lack of creativity because at this point, you know Embiid's going to miss a good amount of games. So there has to be
Of
an
course.
offensive structure in place without him. And all we've seen is just Tyrese Maxey and Paul George isolating. And if
Yeah.
Nurse wants to get really creative, he just does a little quick pick and pop with Yabusele. And that's pretty much all we've seen. But I will say in the game against the Knicks, I saw Sixers get a little bit more creative. I think there was kind of some encouraging things there because Paul George in that game had a lot more of an opportunity to be a ball handler, especially in the third quarter. And I noticed that Nick Nurse ran a lot more interesting pick and roll actions with him as a ball handler in comparison to Maxi. So I think that's something they can definitely build on if they could stay healthy. So yeah, I think overall, Paul George has been the one constant good thing about these few games. He said I want to say 3 or 4 consecutive 20-point games at solid efficiency. So Paul George has honestly hit his stride here, but it just hasn't resulted in wins. Tyrese Maxey continues to be very inconsistent. Some days he looks good as a scorer. Some days he reverts to habits that he struggled with all season, such
Yeah.
as getting tunnel vision at the rim, settling for shots. But I think in that second half against the Knicks, he turned a corner in terms of being aggressive and getting to the rim. So hopefully he can build off of that. But another person I want to shout out is Justin Edwards, who's just been phenomenal. He
Ooh.
had a 20 piece against the Thunder, who I believe had the best defensive rating in the NBA. So he was playing the majority of the minutes. So it's not like some garbage time stint. Like he was really going against all of their wing defenders. And he's just someone who I've monitored a long time. I was high on him when they took him as an undrafted free agent. He's been excellent in the G League. He's just really giving the Sixers and the Bluecoats a boost of athleticism and some 3-and-D play that the Sixers have needed for a very long time now. So hopefully, if this team chooses to sell, he can get much more of an opportunity.
Yeah, I'll start by talking about Maxi, and kind of move into George, who I've been extremely critical of, but he's finally, like you said, picking it up a little bit. Right before we recorded episode 3, for those of you that watched that, it was right before the Washington game where Philly came out winning by 6. And Embiid and George were both out in that game. Maxey finished with 29 on 11 of 27 shooting and 3 of 14 from 3.
Yeah.
Um, to me, that just it speaks very strongly of, and this is not a jab at Maxey. It's just the reality that this cannot be a number 1 guy on a championship team, and no one is holding him to those expectations. But the problem for Philadelphia is he's forced to meet those expectations because George and Embiid can't stay on the floor. Um, like he's shooting 14 threes and making 3 of them. I mean, other than the atrocious efficiency there, it's kind of showing me that like when Maxey's on the court without George and Embiid, he feels a lot more frantic. He feels the need to score 40 points a game just to get them wins. Um, I think they they need to put some trust in some other guys in those cases. We've seen these forwards, the Caleb Martins, the Kelly Oubre's have these explosive games. In that Wizards game, Yabusele had 21 and 8. Performances like that, you need to start relying more on those and less on Maxey to score 45 points just to beat the bottom of the league Washington Wizards. And it truly just carries over into this losing streak. Even with George playing well, you can clearly see there's a level of uncomfortability from Maxey. You've touched on this before without Embiid on the floor. That's when Maxey's at his best. Just playing that two-man game, that pick and pop, that pick and roll, and he just does not have that, and it shows. The same thing applied when James Harden was in Philly. You could tell very strongly when Harden was on the court, Maxey felt more comfortable in the backcourt because all eyes weren't on him. And moving into George, I'll give him his props, even though it hasn't resulted in any wins. I mean, a loss to the Pelicans, like you said, is embarrassing. You take the Knicks to overtime and you lose it there. George was the only, if I'm not mistaken, George was the only positive player plus minus in the 3 games he played in the 4 game streak. Or at least he was positive himself in all of them, which you can't say anything negative about how he played in it. But it truly the sad reality of it is it does not matter if they're not winning games.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one thing that they could pick up moving forward, I've always had this, just I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think having Paul George as the ball handler is the best thing for the Sixers offense. Even maybe when Embiid is in, because like you said, Tyrese Maxey is comfortable when he isn't being the number one guy who
Yeah.
has to create for others and himself. Like you touched on with James Harden, Tyrese Maxey was able to be much more efficient, play so much more freely off the ball with Harden attracting the defense and creating shots for him and Embiid. So if you have Paul George, who at this point is a better playmaker than Maxey, even though he does make simple reads, but he is much better than Maxey as a playmaker. So if you have him kind of running the offense, kind of getting Embiid the ball in the post with Maxey playing more off the ball, I think that'll just create a lot better cohesion, get Maxey much more efficient looks, and make the game simpler for him. Because as you touched on, Tyrese Maxey seems to overcomplicate a lot of things when Embiid's out of the lineup. He
Hmm.
feels the need to be the guy, as you can see with his high volume
Of
shooting and
course, yeah.
efficiency, and it puts him in this funk, right? He settles for a lot of shots. Like I said, he gets
Yeah.
tunnel vision at the rim. He's just so focused on trying to score. But the thing that's frustrated me the most with his game recently is how much he complains of the officials. We the first few years
He's
of Tyrese
yeah.
Maxey's career, we've seen him as this happy-go-lucky, like competitive guy who
Yeah.
never frowns, never
Yeah.
never's in a bad
Never
mood.
is
But this
chirping
season,
at the refs, yeah.
yeah, but this season, granted the team is losing. He's been on record multiple times talking about how that's taken a mental toll on him. We just haven't seen him be that guy. And I guess from a human standpoint, you can't expect him to be Mr. Happy, especially this season. But I don't know. It just irritates me the way he just kind of flails for contacts and then complains to the officials almost every time he goes to the rim. And a lot of the times, they are no calls for a good reason because every time he drives to the basket, he just kind of plays himself into the contact and just flops
Yeah.
around. And that's not going to get you a call. What gets you a call is playing through the contact and trying to finish. That's when the refs will give you that respect. And I think Maxey did a better job of that in the second half against the Knicks. So he needs to build on that going forward. And he can't let the refs kind of live in his head because it sets the tone. And that's even a Nick Nurse issue because even before he was the coach of the Sixers, the Sixers played the Raptors so many times throughout the past few years. I've noticed that Nick Nurse is always on the refs about calls. He's screaming,
Yo,
he's yelling, and that
every
distracts the focus of
time.
the team. You go back to that barely win against the Wizards. The Sixers had I believe, double digit lead at that point in the game, and Nick Nurse started complaining to the officials, and I could see it on the court. The team was starting to lose focus and care more about officiating than the actual game because down the stretch, the Wizards got so many easy points in transition. The Sixers weren't focused. The refing was taking them out of the game, and that just can't happen, especially in this situation where you're missing your star player. You're trying to scrap into the play-in. I think the Sixers' lack of composure and the poor culture that's being set with the officiating is a really big issue here.
Yeah, it's definitely. I wonder what's going on behind closed doors, truly, where the tensions lie in there. Because it's nothing like Miami. Nothing's really public, so you got to give some credit to Philadelphia. I mean, obviously you had the whole Embiid with the reporter thing earlier in the year, but in terms of teammate to teammate, teammate to coaching staff, it's been relatively quiet in that regard. So at least they're seemingly on the same page. Of course, I agree. Complaining to the refs every play is never a good thing, but it doesn't seem completely dysfunctional to look on the bright side. But as you were talking about Maxi building off that second half versus New York, that's not an easy task with who's coming up on their schedule. I'll just read off some of these matchups coming up. Tonight they got the Pacers. Tomorrow night they got the Bucks. Tuesday they have the Nuggets. Friday they have the Cavs. Then you get Chicago and LA, which are for the Sixers still tough games. Then you go Sacramento, Denver, Boston, Dallas. And that brings us to right before the All-Star break. The Dallas game is 2 days before the trade deadline.
I think it's perfect. I mean, if you consider the fact that I think that they should sell, I think this stretch of
This
tough
will
games is
this
at the
will
perfect time
confirm it. This will
because
confirm it, yeah.
at this point, I'm not even being negative. I'm just being objective. This team doesn't have the fight in them to come back and go on a 7 or 8 game win streak. Like,
Yeah,
if they can't bury teams like the Wizards, if they can't handle teams like the Pelicans, or just kind of middle of the pack teams, then this team is not going to come out firing on all
of
cylinders all of a
course,
sudden
yeah.
against elite opponents. Like, you got the Celtics coming up, you got the Cavs coming up, even teams like the Bucks and the Pacers. I don't see them winning those games. So with that, you're just going to create a bigger hole below 500.
And
You're
Denver
going to continue.
twice. Denver
Yep, and Denver
twice.
twice, which is a whole nother
Like,
thing because I've seen so many Nuggets fans complain about Embiid missing that game, even though it literally has nothing to do with them. But anyways, they're going to just continue to dig themselves a hole. They're going to maybe win 2 or 3 of those games on the optimistic side, and by that
yeah,
point, it's February 6th. You're what, maybe 12 games below 500. The plan may be still in reach. So at that point, you're just like, what do? You got to sell at this point because this stretch of games is going to truly show you that this season is essentially a waste
yeah,
because, like I said, they're not going to battle back. They're not going to overcome adversity. This team has never done that. You look at Game 7 against the Hawks. You look at Game 7 against the
true.
Celtics. Like, this team is not a team. I don't want to say they're not mentally tough because I think that'd be too harsh, but this is never a team that we've seen answer the call in do or die circumstances like this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like how Milwaukee was at the beginning of the year at all. I think they started what 2-8, and then they went on like an
Yeah,
eight or
two and
nine
eight.
game win streak. I mean, the biggest cause for that, and it is the exact problem the Sixers have, is that Milwaukee's superstars were consistently showing up, even when they were losing all those games. So instead of the role
And they were
players,
healthy.
yeah, yeah, exactly. They were physically showing up, and when they were on the court, they were showing up. So that's the biggest difference. The Bucks are 2-8 in those first 10, and Giannis is still near the top of the MVP ladder. Dame is having a great second season in Milwaukee. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, your superstars can barely stay on the floor. Like, it's that simple. When you look at it, you'd much rather have your role players need to pick it up than your superstars every time. It's the same thing we saw with like the Nets era of Harden, Irving, and Durant. They just weren't available, or when they were, they weren't on the same page because they had never played together. So to me, I think not a lot of blame can go to Philadelphia's supporting cast.
I think I just want to circle back. 2023, 2024, that season. Embiid is playing the best basketball of his life. He looks like the best basketball player on the planet, but the message was that you're prioritizing flexibility for the 2024 offseason. And Embiid goes down in January. The Sixers, I think at that point, were still a top 3 seed in the East. And you force him to come back with that plan of flexibility in mind. You rush him back, you make him shave off some of his meniscus rather than just calling it how it is because it's just odd to me because if you were prioritizing flexibility that season, then why was there any urgency to rush him back? If the
Exactly.
blueprint was just to save or whatever, prioritize flexibility for to sign Paul George or whatever.
Yeah.
And so now fast forward to January 18th at 2:57 p.m. 2025, the team is now saying that there's a chance they're going to prioritize flexibility again. So that is just, I just want to say how embarrassing and shameful that is. You punt the best season of Embiid's career where he looks like the best, has one of the best. I'm going to say this, if Embiid stayed healthy, I think he would have went on a solid playoff run and established himself as one of the best peaks of a Sixer in franchise history. So you
Yeah.
punt that, and now you're essentially punting this season for flexibility. I don't know how someone would have a job after that. I'm not saying there. I'm just saying in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
If you sacrifice whatever to prioritize flexibility to be a championship contender this season, then end up doing the same exact thing another season, how do you have a job? Like, it's shameful. It should invoke a lot of shame in this front office and this entire organization. And I think it kind of goes back to the thing where Embiid wasn't gonna play all these games, so it's on you to construct a roster that can compete with him with Embiid and without Embiid. And they didn't do that in the offseason. And I mean, there's no point in doing it now. The season's pretty much over. So, like I said, dumping first because they have six first round picks, I believe, between the years 2026 and 2029. If they invested any of those into win now moves this season, that would be catastrophic because this team is just
Yeah.
not going to go far.
Yeah. In on that same note, look, in a worst case scenario, and I want to hear your opinion on this too.
Mhm.
Philadelphia throws in the towel, they sell at the deadline, but let's say they're not able to get the restrictions off that first round pick this year. But you say, you know what? We're gonna put all our eggs in one basket. We're gonna shoot for the top six pick so the Thunder don't get it. And you fall to seven. Who's out of a job in that case? Who are you trading away a superstar? Is the front office and coaching staff getting flipped upside down? What do you do in that scenario?
I think it's interesting because, like we've established, selling is the best way forward. So I wouldn't necessarily blame Daryl Morey there if he came to his
Yeah.
senses and did sell on the high assets.
Hmm.
But if the pick fell to seven, that would probably be the most Sixers thing ever. And it wouldn't surprise me with how misfortunate this organization and Joel Embiid has been. But another interesting aspect to it is Embiid down with selling because all last season, Daryl Morey, like I said, preached flexibility. Is Embiid going to be happy if you waste another season? But granted, on the flip side, he doesn't have much room to stand on considering he's only played 13 games, and there's only so much that can be done about that. So it's a very interesting situation. I don't know if Daryl Morey loses his job because of that, because I think he should lose his job personally if he invests in
Doesn't
win now
sell high.
moves.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, even if you don't get the pick, you still have a lot more flexibility. Maybe you have the non-taxpayer MLE, maybe you don't, but at the end of the day, you can clear a little bit of cap space to kind of retool the supporting players. Caleb Martin will still be on the books, but Kelly Oubre and Andre Drummond might not be. So I don't know. You still have some room to work with in free agency, but at this point, Paul George is only getting older, and Embiid's only getting older,
Yeah.
and the supporting cast it may not mean much at the very end if your top end talent is just declining.
Right. I was gonna pretty much follow that same opinion. I don't think even if everything goes wrong the rest of this season, everything possible goes wrong. I do not think there is a need for any super major changes going into the start of next regular season. I
Yeah,
do,
I completely
however,
agree.
think if you get to the trade deadline of next season or even the summer of 2026, that's when the franchise altering decisions could come into play. Because then
Because
you've
Embiid can't be
seen
traded this year, even if he wanted to.
exactly. But then next offseason, so yeah, 2026 offseason, I think there is a very possible world where Embiid is no longer the face of Philadelphia's franchise, which is crazy to say because he has been for so long. But at what point do you stop relying on a guy that can't play more than 45 games in a regular season? There's
And
only
also, at
so
what
many
point
years
does
you
he
can
get
do that.
frustrated?
Exactly. Like, I mean, we're seeing the same thing with Jimmy, except Embiid has less of a reason to be frustrated, in all honesty. The Sixers front office has given him stars to try and compete with, and he just can't stay healthy. he can't stay healthy alongside him. Jimmy Butler's getting Thomas Bryant and Josh Richardson in free agency. Like at least Philadelphia's front office is putting the money out there. So I think the parting of ways would be mutual, but I think the front office would be very justified in doing so.
Yeah, it's an interesting debate. Obviously, we have to see what would happen in the 2025-2026
Of
season.
course.
But I don't know. I mean, the short-term future just doesn't look great, to be honest. If Embiid can't stay healthy right now, who's to say he can when he's in his like early 30, when he's like 32 or
Exactly.
33 when that
Yep.
extension kicks in. So it's just rough. I mean, that's really all I gotta
That's the
say.
reality of it, yeah. Um, I'll close us with a little bit of a prediction for Indiana tonight. Let me just take a quick peek at the injury report. Yabu's questionable, George is questionable, Maxi's in, Caleb Martin's out. For Indiana, it looks like most of their guys are healthy. Um, if we beat the Wizards by 6 and we're on a 4-game losing streak, I don't see a world where this is the one that snaps it. That my
Yeah,
prediction's as simple as that.
and from an X's and O's standpoint, you have two quality perimeter defenders who could give Maxi trouble if Paul George isn't there between
Yeah,
Nembhard and TJ. Also, you can mix in, sprinkle in some blitzes, some doubles, and Maxi has proven that he can't handle that too well as the number one option. So
of
with
course,
that,
yeah.
Indiana will force turnovers. Halliburton will do his thing in transition. Pacers will get multiple runouts. So then, if you're without Yabusele and without Embiid, there's only so much Andre Drummond could do against like Pascal Siakam and Miles Turner. So Indiana might dominate in transition and in the half court. It's going to be a rough watch. They have Milwaukee tomorrow, which I'm furious about because this is now the second straight Eagles playoff game where the Sixers play. So I'm very upset about that. That'll probably be a lost all. They'll be tired. Giannis will probably run them out the building. So it's probably only going to get worse from here, if I'm being quite honest.
Yep. I look. Hopefully, by the time our fifth episode comes out, Philadelphia is shocking the world and beating these good teams, but I don't think either of us seen that happen.
You know,
All right. Well, thank you all for watching episode 4 of the podcast, and stay tuned for more.